started, so I want to welcome everybody back for the last SLEM seminar of the year. So there's been a lot of stuff in the news lately about learning analytics. If you read any higher ed, anything, you're going to see people talking about it. I was amazed to see this morning in Inside Higher Ed, there's a meeting going on at Arizona State University where the keynote speakers are Jeb Bush and Michael Milken.
Right.
And it's about technology in higher ed.
Gee, we never invited him to the seminar.
You could probably buy better donuts than me.
Yeah.
Kind of crazy. Anyway, so I wanted to mention that it looks like we will be able to continue this series next year. It'll probably be in a little bit different kind of configuration. Might be a different space, I don't know, but look for it in the fall. We'll be happening again. Our speaker today is Brian Jacob, who's the Walter Annenberg Professor of Education Policy, Professor of Economics, Director of the Center on Local, State, and Urban Policy. That's a good close-up. I like that.
Yeah, that's...
In the Gerald Ford School of Public Policy. He's also been a policy analyst in New York City in the mayor's office at Todd Middle School. So you get immediate street cred for doing that even once. I think that's pretty great. His current research focuses on urban school reform and teacher labor markets, things like that. Looking through your webpage today, I found this intriguing paper about organizing schools to improve student achievement, start times and grade configurations, and the sort of really cheap things that might be possible to really improve K-12 education. Really neat work. Today he's going to talk about educational attainment in Michigan, educational policy local. So, take it away.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I've heard one of my colleagues and co-conspirator, Sue Donarski, is here in the back. So a lot of the work I'll be talking about is joint work with her and some other folks on campus. Let's see. So I thought I was going to give a little background about myself, but I think Tim has largely done that. So I do education policy research, many of it in other places. Most of it has, in the past, been K-12 research, but I've been working more in higher education in the last few years. Sue and I have started over the last 5 years a series of projects and collaborations based in Michigan, a lot of which focus around the high school college transition. And so I thought I would just kind of give you a sense of some of the work that we're doing, and we'll go from there. So I'm going to talk about this Michigan Consortium for Educational Research, some related research projects, and then present some actual numbers from preliminary analysis on college trends in Michigan. So what is MCER? It's the Michigan Consortium for Educational Research. It's an IES. IES, for those who don't know, is the Institute for Education Sciences. It's the funding research wing within the U.S. Department of Education. It's a collaboration between U of M, MSU, and the state. The objectives are to engage stakeholders and education experts in research about public education, to help provide some research-based evidence for policymakers in Michigan, and hopefully in doing so inform some of the national debates. And I should say, I guess one of the, the prior objective or the necessary step to do these things is to put together a student longitudinal data system. And so up till now, that is what has occupied most of the last 3 or 4 years, is working with the state and the various state agencies to help them combine some data that they already had, but some data that we've helped them collect, linking students from kindergarten and following them through college. And having all of the information on school enrollment and achievement scores and transcripts and college enrollment kind of in a form that one could actually do research on, as opposed to simply produce reports on discrete areas of that for federal requirements. So that is what has occupied most of our time up till now. So this is, I guess, this is the pictorial version of what I said. We are combining state data, the MEP and MME and ACT are standardized exams, along with graduation enrollment. National Student Clearinghouse is an organization that provides college enrollment data for students. And then we're in the process of collecting our own data on high school transcripts and other kind of information about students' high school performance that's really never held at the state level, and sometimes not held even at the district level, but is really a school level piece of information that we're trying to bring together to create this longitudinal student level data set. So what are we going to do with this? The first kind of two projects, or the projects that at least got us the money to do this, although we're hoping they're just the very beginning, is to look at the Michigan Merit Curriculum. And for those of you who aren't familiar, is a recent initiative in Michigan to essentially raise high school graduation standards by requiring students take and pass certain courses in order to graduate. And as opposed to earlier reforms which said students have to take 3 years of science and 4 years of English and 2 years of foreign language, this goes beyond that and actually specifies the exact courses. So many states require students to take 3 or 4 years of math, but don't specify which. So kind of disadvantaged students will take their 4 years of math being kind of pre-algebra, consumer math, and architectural math. That would be the 4 years of high school math they take. This is requiring all students in order to graduate high school in Michigan have to take and pass Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2, Chemistry or Physics, and a host of other courses. So this is college curriculum for all is the basic idea of this. We're going to be using, once we have the data together, the idea is to use what is known as a comparative interrupted time series designed to look at this. I have some slides that I cribbed from another class to kind of show what that might look like. We'll be looking at a whole variety of outcomes: college course taking patterns, student achievement, high school graduation, college enrollment. The second question we'll be looking at is the effect of the Michigan Promise Scholarship. That was a short-lived merit-based scholarship program in Michigan that, for students that met certain GPA and test score requirements, would provide them a modest amount of money for tuition and expenses in college. We'll be using a regression discontinuity research design to look at that. That is essentially a research design which takes advantage of the fact that student eligibility for the scholarship was based on a strict cutoff on a standardized test score. And so the cutoff was 150. One can compare students who scored 149 with students that scored 150. You would think that within that group, they are virtually randomly assigned. So you kind of replicate a controlled experiment, and then look at the outcomes of the 149ers versus the 150ers to infer the impact of the college scholarship. So there's lots of details, but that's a rough idea of this research design. And so for each of these questions, we'll be looking at variation across various characteristics, schools, districts. This is from a different study where I used this design. This is kind of give people a sense. I wasn't sure. Sue told me that part of what I should be doing is talking about the analytics or research design aspects, so I had to throw in a few figures. No Greek letters, but we can pretend. So this is the intuition here. We have the circles are the control group, the triangles and the solid lines are the treatment group. So imagine in our case, the control group is Ohio or Indiana, and the treatment group is Michigan. Or the control group might be a high-performing district where the kids always took these college courses anyway, and so the curriculum was not a new treatment, it was not binding for them. And the treatment group is the low-performing districts where this new requirement really did require them to change things. And the idea is that one is going to compare the change in performance here, 2002, let's say that's when the intervention went in. A reflects the deviation from trend among the treatment group, those low-performing districts or that state of Michigan that had the new requirement. Now, but you're worried because lots of other things were going on in the early 2000s. This was not randomly assigned. Things there might be other factors. So you have your control group, and note that you're looking not just in a difference in levels, but a difference in trends. So it's deviation from the predicted trend you extrapolate out from the pre-period. And in the comparative interrupted time series, the effect you're measuring is essentially this difference in deviations. And so this is robust to some concerns of confounding factors, but certainly not all concerns. And so this is the approach, the design that we're thinking of for the evaluating the high school reforms in Michigan. Let's see. So I want now this is the MSIR research project, this consortium to create a student level longitudinal database. What I want to talk about now are kind of two related projects where we're going to be utilizing data from this data set that was created to answer some other questions. These are both projects that are in collaboration with Sue. Seems like I don't do anything that's not with Sue these days. So the one is the effect of charter schools on educational outcomes. So the research questions here, essentially what is the impact of attending a charter school on a variety of student outcomes? Does the impact vary for various subgroups of students? And then the last question, what practices, programs, policies, characteristics of charter schools are associated with these positive impacts? And so this is lots of folks have done lots of descriptive work on charter schools. The primary, I think, limitation of most of the prior work is that attendance at charter schools is non-random, and it's determined very consciously by parents and children. And those factors that determine attendance may also independently determine their performance. Either the most motivated parents are families that choose charter schools, which might lead one to overstate any positive effects of charter schools, or it's only the kids that are having a lot of trouble that are going to go to the effort to get out of their traditional public school and find some other option. And if that were the dynamic, it might lead you to understate the causal effect of charter schools. So in some prior work, Sue and others have used lotteries. So by law in nearly every state, charter schools that are oversubscribed because they receive public funding can't choose who they want to admit. They have to admit individuals in an oversubscribed situation randomly. So they have a lottery. It's actually, there's videos of them having big urns with balls and choosing, and parents in the auditorium cheering or crying because they don't get in. So it is a random lottery in every sense of the word. And that's very nice from a research perspective because it allows kind of the equivalence of the comparison and treatment group to be created. So what we will be doing is comparing the outcomes of those individuals who applied to and won charter lotteries to the outcomes of individuals who also applied to but lost the charter lotteries, and kind of inferring the effects of attending a charter school from this comparison. We're in the process of collecting data from many of the 248 charter schools in the state. We have data on applicants who participate in lotteries in about 60 schools so far. We'll be matching that data on applicants to the state database that we've created, which will then give us access in a relatively cost-effective way as opposed to kind of going out and finding and surveying folks and contracting at the $3,000 per hour rate that our wonderful ISR survey research operations charge. Using the beauty of administrative data to look at outcomes a little bit more cost effectively. And so, again, we're interested in looking at outcomes on attainment and achievement in elementary and secondary school, but also I think one of the contributions of this work is that it will be able to look past high school graduation into college performance, which is not, I don't know if there's any, thus far, I don't know if there's any charter school work, lottery-based charter school work that's done that. So we'll be the first to do that. Then I think one of the actually most potentially interesting aspects of this project is once we've identified for these, let's say, 60 charter schools, we have a separate estimate on how effective each of these 60 charter schools are. We're also in the process of collecting lots of data through administrative records, through interviewing principals and teachers, through looking at curricula and teacher training practices, trying to characterize each of the 60 charter schools on the basis of their kind of key programmatic components. Whether maybe school uniforms or little mini financial incentives they give students or a special parent involvement training program that's a key feature of their school. And so what we'll do then is look at the association, and I'm saying association consciously to differentiate it from kind of making causal inferences. So look at the relationship between the practices of these 60 charter schools, let's say, and their effectiveness measures to provide suggestive evidence about what effective practices might be. Now, I think it's important to realize that will be kind of descriptive associations, correlations. No one randomly assigned charter school A to have this parent participation program or randomly assigned this curriculum to charter school B. So there could be factors that are associated with their adoption of a certain practice that are driving the achievement effects and not the practice itself. But I think this is good suggestive evidence. And I think we'll probably be even, I'm most excited about this line of research because I think, while I personally think that charter schools have some, have had some positive effects and there is some potential for them. I don't think they have the possibility of changing the educational landscape for vast numbers of students now. So the fraction of students in charter schools now is about 2 or 3%.
3.7.
3.7 in the United States. And to give you a sense, my statistics are old now, but as of the early 2000s, there were as many homeschooled students in the United States as charter school students. So for all the popular press and attention and politics, this is a relatively small player in the educational landscape. So I think if we can kind of learn from the successes that some charter schools seem to have, and then hopefully apply those to other schools, that's really where the biggest potential for kind of systemic reform will come. And so I think that the third research question here really is what I'm thinking of as potentially the most interesting and important part of the project. This is kind of one project.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, sure.
So that's the overall the United States, the percent, but are there states where there's higher concentration?
Oh, yeah.
So you can look at it as an ecology in a sense that, what's the local ecology for charter schools versus the random 1 or 2 in a whole state? No.
Right, so there's certainly variation. So certain states, Michigan, for example, Arizona,
New Orleans is 60%.
well, New Orleans, certainly in schools now.
Right.
Districts.
Rebuilt.
Detroit now is,
20?
more than that. I guess after this next year, it's gonna be even more than that. So I think there's some, I guess that would kind of influence the analysis or thinking about that in a few ways. One, that kind of speaks to an issue of external validity. So the results we find in Michigan are going to be based on the context of a relatively heavy charter population in a state. And one may think that may be less applicable to charter schools in Wyoming, where there's like 4. But maybe not. These are kind of, right, these are,
So we're doing this actually in partnership with Massachusetts. And they're starting a project in Texas as well. Because we suspect that there may be differences across contexts. So I was certainly surprised at how different the laws and the practices were in Michigan as opposed to Massachusetts.
But also it urges some caution in using a number like 2 or 3%, because someone could easily dismiss that as not really having an impact on the educational landscape. But if you're talking about New Orleans,
It's like some of the
where
words funding agencies we applied to before rejected us. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
we had to
Right.
raise the point that it's actually pretty big in some areas.
Yeah, great.
No.
Yeah, as I think, I don't know, that just makes, you say 2% and I think, oh, that's, I'm not too excited, but when I think about communities where it maybe or potentially be something that could have a significant impact on the educational landscape, then that's a very different story. Yeah.
The air conditioning system.
That was mice or something. Okay, the second project, or another project that we're working on has to do with community colleges, and specifically looking at the economic returns to community college. So the research questions here are, what is the economic return to various community college certificates and degrees? Do these effects vary by college, student subgroup, over time? And then the last bullet, which was, as I was making this 15 minutes ago, did not take out. You can ignore that. So the sample we have thus far is we've been working with 4 community colleges, Macomb, Oakland, Washtenaw, and Jackson. We have obtained complete student transcript data for all students who stepped foot in these colleges for a 10-year period, or 11-year period. This includes every course they took, every grade they got, every exam score, everything. And we are linking this data as we speak, or someone else is linking this data as we speak, via Social Security numbers to earnings and employment data that's provided by the DOL, Department of Labor in Michigan. And so what are we going to be doing with this? I mean, the first pass is just using kind of standard, I guess, regression models or kind of models of association controlling for a variety of covariates to look at the economic returns. The second bullet point there is individual fixed effects, and so that's a term that probably lots of disciplines do the same thing and call it different things. That's essentially looking within an individual, and this is largely applicable to students that return to community college after some work history, and using their prior path of earnings as essentially the counterfactual for their earnings that they receive after community college. So you're kind of using an individual to control for him or herself. And again, for the 25, 28, 30, 45-year-old who has a path of earnings history, that's useful. For the 17-year-old, that's less useful. And then I think one of the third things we're very interested about is kind of using some what economists refer to as instrumental variables approaches, but it's kind of more generally methods that exploit, again, the kind of admissions or assignment process to certain degrees or certificates. So very highly popular degrees and certificates like nursing, medical technician, phlebotomy is very popular these days, little known fact. So it's very hard to get to be trained to be a phlebotomist. They use kind of admissions rules, which are some combination of GPA in your first year required courses, like a standardized admissions exam. There's a separate exam, kind of like the GRE, but to get into a nursing school, which is some mix of basic knowledge and knowledge of things that are supposedly help you as you prepare to be a nurse. And schools, typically community colleges, mush all these things together and give a student a number. You're a 128, that's your admission score ranking. And then they go down and we have 50 openings and they admit from the highest score down till they fill the 50 spots. And again, so one can use a regression discontinuity design there, comparing students who just, because of some combination of their test score and grades, couldn't get into nursing versus one that did get into the nursing program. So there's a variety, that's one example of kind of these potential instrumental variable strategies. To to look at the returns to some of these more competitive or popular degrees. So this is, I mean, again, part of this, this economic returns to degrees and certificate is what got us the IES funding to put together this data set with the community colleges and link it to the earnings data in the same way that we are doing with the K-12 data. We're hoping this is really just the springboard for a variety of other projects that utilize this data source. So we've been working with these community colleges, talking about a whole bunch of pilot projects, looking at the impact of remedial education programs, online courses, student support, different strategies for student support, and we're thinking some of these starting kind of using data they have to do some descriptive analysis of what they have, kind of similar to what you were saying, and then build upon that to have some planned kind of experiment pilots where we have test kind of different intervention models or different programs for students. And so this is something that I think we're also kind of very excited about, and up to now, over the past 3 years, has yielded absolutely nothing, but that is...
1 year.
It seems like a decade.
The theme for that last one, which I think is especially relevant for this group, is that we're working with the colleges to learn from the stuff they're experimenting with anyway. So these are all things that they're doing already and trying already. So when they roll out something new, can we learn from their rollout? So have them roll it out in such a way that we can actually learn what the impact of the program is. So we're not coming in and saying, let's try this new method of online instruction, but rather, okay, you're deciding to roll out this new program, let's do it in a way that we can compare to people who did and didn't use it and learn something about whether it works.
Right. So there's lots of ways, I think, that to kind of, with slight changes in the implementation strategy or slight changes in the project or the program, one can really get very, very credible causal estimates, whereas what you would have gotten in the absence of that would have been absolutely nothing. So this is an interesting lesson, just kind of a little caveat here, which may be relevant to the data analytics idea. So when I think about this myself, when I talk with students about these, vast data sources, so the student longitudinal data system, millions of students with like hundreds of points of information and lots of variables, this community college, how many million students over an 11-year period linked to all this earnings, that by itself, even if you're kind of a very clever data analyst or very competent at R or SAS or Stata, is quite, I don't want to say useless, but very insufficient. And so kind of data alone, and this is a lesson I think I try to impart to lots of graduate students, is like data alone is necessary but far from sufficient. And it is kind of understanding sources of variation in whatever predictor you're interested in, and how that relates, and whether that relates in a causal sense to some mediator or long-term outcome of interest. Because people have looked at correlations between this and that with, you have a great, I think the study we use in kind of program evaluation was it the nurses study? We have 25 million nurses, and we did a huge correlation and have definitively determined that, positive education is correlated with better health.
It was the hormone replacement therapy.
Oh, that was another one. But okay, so what was the hormone?
So we had decades of epidemiological evidence indicating from the nurses study, which followed nurses longitudinally over time. Nurses are very compliant when we want to come take their blood and blood pressure. So this was like top level data. And from that, the correlations and even the conditional correlations using regressions indicated that hormone replacement therapy really helped women's health. This is when women go to menopause, that they're provided with estrogen. And what they observed was the women who were taking estrogen upon menopause were healthier in a lot of different ways. And so on the basis of this, it became standard that doctors prescribed hormone replacement therapy for women when they hit menopause. So millions and millions of women were taking these hormones. There was finally an experiment on this topic about 10 years ago, where they randomly assigned women either get this hormone replacement therapy or not. And from that, they stopped it after a couple of years because they found death rates were higher among those randomly assigned to the drugs, right? So, and this was essentially because the women who were taking the drugs were the types who were going to the doctor a lot, asking their doctor about whether they should be taking it, but in unobserved ways, they were different. And so data alone doesn't do it. It's where is the variation coming in the treatment.
Right. So this is, okay, sufficient but not necessary but not sufficient. So these are kind of two other related projects that we're working on. And so I thought for the last piece I want to show you is just some data, some statistics on high school graduation and college enrollment in Michigan. And I think we're thinking of this in two ways. One, we've been trying to look at some of this as a baseline because a lot of the reforms we're looking at are kind of high school reforms, high school college transition reforms. We wanted to understand how were students doing prior to the reforms and kind of get some descriptive information on this and how that varied across various characteristics of students and schools. But also we've been trying to do this almost as a pedagogical exercise to help state leaders, district leaders, and even school leaders realize how they can use some of this data to kind of inform their practice and their policies. So this is what we've done so far. So this is looking at ninth graders in 04-05 in Michigan, where on-time high school graduation would be 08 and 09. This is prior to the MMC, which is the new high school curriculum reforms. And so we've just plotted lots of kind of descriptive data here. The fraction of the cohort remaining. So this is looks at ninth grade, it's 100% by definition. Going down to graduating high school, we see here that 80% of students overall in Michigan graduate high school on time. About a little bit less than 60% will enroll in college. And note that if you take the 60% over the 80%, you'll find about 3/4 of them, even conditional on time high school graduation, only about 3/4 of them enroll in any post-secondary education. So this is either obvious or surprising, depending on who you are and what you thought. More than one person has been very surprised by this. I learned this too long ago to know remember whether I was really surprised or not. And then persisting into the second year of college, right? So this is where we were, and this is on average. I mean, note that this is, as we think about this are good or bad, this is not for students in Detroit, right? This is averaging Bloomfield Hills in Detroit, so to speak. So
I would like to be able to create one of these figures for the University of Michigan. I have not seen similar. So like, what is the for each year? Is there I was on a committee that was supposed to be thinking about dropout rates, and we didn't.
And did you ask? You didn't know what they were.
Along the line, the dropouts were recurring. Is it first year, second year, third year? Is it constant? Is there some critical year or something? So we could do this with the University of Michigan to try to figure out.
You could actually do this even better. You could do this. I'm sure the people that teach in these areas kind of know this informally. But if you're looking at kind of transition across majors, and when one policy question, STEM majors, especially for underrepresented groups in STEM majors, create this graph for majoring in STEM, for females majoring in STEM, and have the x-axis be courses, either specific courses or number of courses or level. I mean, I'm sure someone has done this absolutely informally. Maybe someone has done this formally. Gateway, there's kind of gatekeeper courses that people talk about. Although the anecdotal evidence on that is much, certainly at the high school level with which I'm familiar the most, people for years have thought like the gatekeeper course for high school is Algebra 1. Like kind of 9th grade, Algebra 1. This is not for probably all of us and everyone we know mostly. That was not an issue, that's not binding. But for students who are on the margin of graduating high school, Algebra 1 is kind of, I think, if people think of, K-12 educators think of it as the gateway course. But actually, people in Chicago have looked at this more closely with some of the administrative data from Chicago, and it turns out that's not the case at all. Like people, if you have trouble in Algebra 1, you might not, yes, some of the people who have trouble in Algebra 1 in 9th grade, don't graduate, but lots of other people don't graduate, and lots of people who ace Algebra 1 drop out. I mean, so it is empirically, it is not at all the gatekeeper in the sense that people had thought Algebra 1 for urban school district high schools would be. So I'm not sure how our kind of anecdotal impressions really would compare to the actual numbers at the college level.
There again, you want to be careful about your outcome metric, because from the work that we've done with the MSTEM Academy, which are the at-risk students in engineering, it would be important, of course, to know how the students, do they stay at the university, but also apparently quite important is their GPA, because while they may graduate, they may not have a GPA that makes them competitive on the job market. And it's not just that you want to get them to graduate.
Right.
You want to get them competitive for the best jobs. Right.
So it's,
Right. Yeah.
So, okay, so I'm gonna, let's see. This is by free lunch status, kind of a very rough proxy for income. Ever free lunch, you can see high school graduation rates closer, a little bit below 70%.
This is Michigan.
Michigan.
Oh.
All of Michigan. This is 9th graders in 04 and 05 in Michigan. I'm not sure if anyone had a 9th grader themselves in 04, 05 or close. I didn't. That's going to be a while. But okay, so by race, nothing here is very surprising. So this is all, there's kind of some of the more interesting stuff I think is a bit later. Depressing, but probably not surprising. Yep.
Are those data by race weighted at all? Because I have to think your sample sizes are going to be very different depending on the various races there.
No, no. So I think, but that would influence the precision of these estimates, right, not the averages. So
okay, right,
the estimates for the Hispanics are less precise. So if you had a confidence interval around each dot, that would be larger. Yeah. But these are all, anything you can see here with the entire state of Michigan is statistically significant.
So other group means Asian and other.
That is low incidence, non-Caucasian, based on the very poor racial coding scheme available. And this, right, it could be anything.
Which would be
It's a small
number. Very different economic
There's actually, I think that whites and Asians are together, but this is about 120,000 observations, just to give you a sense.
Yeah, cohort in Michigan is about 120,000 ninth graders. As we've been knowing for years, one of the first papers I wrote in graduate school was Where the Boys Aren't, trying to understand why we were so unsuccessful in education in general, and particularly post-secondary education, and it's still true. The boys are lagging behind. And if you look at the interaction between race and gender, the difference becomes even starker. Low-income boys do particularly bad, low-income non-white. Let's see, this is same things. Okay, so this is descriptive. Now kind of gets into some of the, I'm going to say analytics, but I think that's going to be too generous for what we've done so far. Some the data that we've done to kind of, this is aimed at school district superintendents or state level policymakers to help them understand where the potential limit, where the quote unquote problems are, the lack of success in their district or their state, and what might be some causes behind it.
To make an analogy with the University of Michigan, we could, the analogy could be that the districts are the majors. So do we see that within majors, there's more, are the differences in dropout rates across majors versus within majors by student characteristics to be something that we could take a look at.
So this is high school graduation by district. So the blue dots are the district average. The red dots are circles, and the size is based on the number of observations. So smaller dots are from smaller schools. Is within each district, there are a number of high schools, and the red dots reflect the high school's own average in this outcome, which is graduation. So if you look at if you look at the blue triangles and how they trend, these are ordered based on I think this is ordered based, is it on SES or based just literally on the high school graduation? I mean, it's exactly the same.
Graduation rate, not controlling for anything.
But it's the order on the x-axis is, we've sorted it by high school graduation. There's some baseline year, but you can tell if people that know Michigan, which I'm new to Michigan, but Birmingham and Bloomfield Hills are apparently kind of affluent Detroit area suburbs. Flint and Detroit are not. They are very high poverty urban areas. And so like the slight upward slope of the blue triangles shows that at the district level, there's kind of this trend, relationship, kind of implicitly between poverty and graduation rates. But what we...
In a NOVA sense, that's the across-district variation.
Yes, across.
Graduation. Yep.
Good. Statistical connection, that's good. But what we think is even more interesting, and especially interesting for, imagine you're a district superintendent looking at this. You look within Flint, look at the variation across high schools within Flint in terms of the graduation rate. And you're gonna, that's gonna at least start you thinking, and then you're gonna come up, well, is the high school with over 80% graduation rate, is that like the school for gifted and talented in Flint? Well, we're going to get to that. It turns out the answer is no. But we're going to kind of look at these variations. So I think this is the kind of, the idea, the very rough idea of what we're kind of working on for district superintendents and administrators.
Sorry, is there something similar about all the small number, maybe 10 or 8 schools that are on the low end?
Schools that are
low end, like
the 20%ers.
20%.
I don't know. I haven't looked at each of these carefully enough as individuals. These are not, we have excluded from this people that, I think we exclude like people that move out of state. So like the denominator doesn't include people that you might think are out of the sample legitimately.
Some of these might be sort of the, assigned high school for kids who are having a hard time.
Right. I mean, so some of these, they're clearly alternative high schools for at-risk students. So that could very well be part of it.
Stone and Ann Arbor, is that the?
Yeah. But this is where I think we can get even some more interesting stuff. College enrollment by district. And I mean, this is huge. This is unconditional college enrollment. So this is not conditional on high school graduation. But if you look at just the degree of variation between this, and the scale is the same. Note that it's always 0 to 1. I mean, the variation in Detroit in college enrollment is even great across high schools, even greater than the variation in high school graduation. This is just kind of another way of looking at the district average. Given the time frame, I want to get to some of the things when we come back to these. So this is college persistence by district. We can look at a variety of outcomes, the same graphical setup, the same idea.
So this is persistence, so they've gone to some college, do they persist in the second?
But this is all unconditional.
No, this was conditional.
Oh.
Right there on the axis.
Conditional on enrolling. Okay, but this is unconditional.
They get there, do they stay?
Yeah.
So the high school persists strongly into that.
Right. So this is.
Well, we reordered it each time,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yep, that's right. So this is. Now, variation. So what is causing this? Is this just that the bottom dots are the school for at-risk students, in which case you might think there's less insight or less policy implications because this is kind of a factor of the inputs and not on the technology, of the production technology that economists would say. You have input, the students, how you get them, the technology, what you do with them, and then this is the output. We're a very humane profession.
They're weighted team schools. They're weighted by the size.
Right.
So those are not something you
So let's, so let's look at, is it heterogeneity in practices or students? So now we just look at poor students. So the only students included in here are those eligible for free lunch. So we're kind of, I mean, think about this is kind of like the bivariate poor man's regression. Like we're just kind of conditioning on one group. And so here, even looking at only free lunch students, we see there's still a good bit of heterogeneity. And actually, interestingly now, at some of these higher performing high schools on the right, there's even more variation. Before, what we were seeing is basically you're seeing some of the high schools on the left, the lower performing high schools overall. That's where the districts overall, there was some across school variation, but not so much here. But now if we look at just poor students, that certain, within Utica, the 3 different high schools in Utica actually do quite a different job in educating their poor students. Okay, so again, you might think, well, poverty, this free lunch indicator is a very rough indicator. There could be very big differences across the poor students in one Utica high school versus another Utica high school. Well, that's kind of dig a little bit deeper. And so this is, again, high school, but this is interesting. Look at that versus that, non-poor students. So this is graduation by, black students.
It's the same district, it's poor versus non-poor.
Non-poor.
Just putting it together is what that was.
Right. So this is high school graduation of black students. Again, substantial heterogeneity, much more than I think I would have thought initially. And what I have getting down, I'm not sure if it's this slide or the next, but I'm going to go to, there's slides where we cut this by their academic achievement scores. We've done, I don't forget what we have in here. We have done based on 11th grade cuts, the Michigan Merit Curriculum 11th grade. We've also done it based on their 8th grade, kind of their last pre-high school grade level cut. So this should get much more precisely at different preparation levels for students, whereas race and poverty are kind of very crude proxies. So I want to get to those because I think that's,
Yeah.
okay. Is this the first time we had the, okay, so this is this is among students scoring proficient on the 11th grade exam. And this is, I mean, proficient is a, what is the baseline proficiency? This was before they raised the cutoff, but
Correct. So
but this is still
the top group.
It's still right. No, it's not the top group. It's the second group. There's like advanced.
So it's the second and above.
Yeah. So this is a, this is a meaningfully high bar. So these students have to kind of know something to be proficient, even on Michigan's exams.
And note that the exam actually includes the ACT.
Right, the exam is like a big...
Pick out, basically what ACT uses to define as proficiency and use that.
Right. And so here, huge variation in, is that Flint or Pontiac? Flint, Detroit, Grand Rapids. So there's and so I think the idea here is this is, as we cut this finer and finer, and kind of the more parsimonious specification for this would kind of be running school level value added models, trying to run a regression model where you control for a variety of pre-high school characteristics of a student, and see which high school is conditional on the composition of their inputs have the biggest residuals, have the biggest kind of growth, and that would kind of be the most parsimonious way of kind of combining all the information that we're trying to get here, and that's something that we're working on now. But I think visually, this is, if you're talking with high school, school superintendents, maybe college administrators too. I have done that less, but pictures are sometimes easier for people. Yeah, so this is some of the work we've done here on this. College enrollment by advanced. This is, again, even scoring in the advanced. So this is the advanced category. So variation, is this in 1, 2, 3, 4? So Taylor. In Taylor, one of their, the advanced is like students should be easily able to get into a 4-year college in Michigan. I mean, this is a high standard. And so in Taylor, the 4th bullet point, one high school, 100% of their advanced students are enrolled in college, and maybe 75% in another high school. I mean, that's a large difference, especially if we're thinking about a group. And this is, I mean, also recall, this is a measure taking at the end of 11th grade. So it's not just that kind of kids were starting out in 8th grade really high, and well, who knows, maybe they lost it along the way in high school and it wasn't the high school's fault. And I mean, this is like at the end of the 11th grade, these kids should have easily been able to get into Eastern or Western or Central and potentially MSU or U of M. And in one high school, only 75% of them ended up going to any college, let alone, and note that we have data here from the National Student Clearinghouse, even on non-Michigan colleges. So if they end up going out of state, for the most part, we still capture them. So it's not just that some people are leaving the state and that's the issue here. So, I mean, I think the upshot here is that there really seems to be some substantial within district across high school variation in student performance, even student performance conditional on observable characteristics. And so
right here even, we've got policy implications, right? So this says that, there are schools where even, pushing further on high school preparation isn't going to help these kids who are scoring advanced, right? They're already prepared for college.
Right.
Something's going on with the transition to college.
Right.
So that suggests stuff like financial aid counseling, counseling for college applications, right? So that suggests, getting in there and working with the students on actually the mechanics of going to college.
Right.
Which is a different conclusion than you would have if you saw that you basically had no variation left once you controlled for the exam. That would suggest that it's not so much about those mechanics. So you actually, even a fancy schmancy.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
You can get some conclusions about what you should be doing.
Mm-hmm. And so this is, I mean, I guess this is just an illustration of the type of kind of analysis. If you think back to one of the first objectives of the MSIR, it was to kind of engage policymakers and using data to help inform policy. I mean, this is kind of part of that effort. This is kind of the beginning pieces there. And so I think it's 1 o'clock and there's some more graphs, but I think we're basically, so that's, this is the 8th grade exam now.
Is it till 1 or 1:30?
Till 1.
One.
Right.
So I'm happy to answer other questions.
You need to have a part 2, finish up all. This is really fascinating information.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's where this data has been 3 years in the creation. So and I'm not just imagining that. That's definitely so.
Questions? Okay.
It's overwhelming. I mean, it's.
Just walk up and